Welcome everyone to today's Echo Voices session with Carrie Luse and Noelle Birky from the Assistive Technology Lab at Community Vision. They are joining us today to talk about speech generating device funding. And I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to give it to you guys.
Okay. Thank you, Chandra. Thank you, Deb. We are super excited to be here. As I mentioned, this is a little bit of a niche funding speech generating devices. Since we are a small group, Noelle and I will introduce ourselves. And then if you'd like to introduce yourself, it'd be great to hear who all's here. We might have mostly SLPs, but there might be other folks as well. So for us, there we are. So I'll go first. I know several of you folks here. I am Carrie Luse. I am an occupational therapist and also a certified assistive technology practitioner. I'm the director of the Assistive Technology Lab at Community Vision in Portland, and we'll share a little bit more about the lab in a moment. Noelle, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, hello. I'm Noelle Birky. I am the assistant director at the Assistive Technology Lab, and I'm also a speech language pathologist and AAC specialist. And then someone that's not here, you can see on the screen, is Cynthia Castaneda. She is our accessibility specialist, and she is also an SLPA.
Great, thanks. So again, we're kind of a small group. If you would like to type in the chat what your position is, where you are, feel free. If anyone wants to unmute and introduce themselves, that would be great. I see we have Deb Lesher here from Columbia Regional, who knows all about SGD funding. And we have Blair Sellers, a vendor. So we have some of our friends here. Anyone want to unmute and tell us who you are and where you are? We've got, oh, I see Julie Peacock is an SLP from Cascade School District in Turner. Thank you, Julie, for being here.
I can go. My name's Michal Rubin. I'm the assistive technology specialist for Gresham Barlow, and I'm a speech pathologist. And I have, are you signing in? Mm-hmm. Chelsea Shea is my counterpart at Gresham Barlow. She's an OT. We're the AT team here. So,
Chelsea, I'm so glad you're here because it's a team effort. We've got Blair here with Toby Dynavox in the Portland and surrounding area. We've got Allie, who's the AT specialist in Central Oregon. Anyone else want to unmute and share?
There's also in the chat Frankie from Salem Kaiser School District, microcomputer. Wow, I want that. I haven't heard that term before.
Yeah, very cool.
Brian from ATI, thank you for being here.
I'm Deborah from Columbia Regional Program. I'm a speech path and AEC consultant with our program, our OI program, but we serve lots of low incidence kids.
Okay, well, we'll go ahead and get started. But again, you can type in the chat as we go along if you'd like. Okay, so as I mentioned, we are from the Assistive Technology Lab in Portland at Community Vision. We have our website up here if you'd like to learn more about us. It's cv-atlab.org. We are an education and resource center, open to anyone, open to the public. You can call or email us with questions anytime. We'll do our best to answer. If not, we'll reach out to other folks and try to get an answer for you. You can come visit us. If you are in the Portland area, we are open to the public every Thursday afternoon. We have open hours from 12 to 5. We have a free loan closet. It's again in the Portland area, so you got to come pick it up. You can mail it back if you'd like. We also offer funding support, which you'll hear about later. We disperse some ZTOSH funds for educational equipment, so you'll hear more about that. So please check us out online. So why are we talking about SGD funding? Because it's super fun and it's really easy. So really, why is it difficult? Personally, I think it's gotten a little better over the years. So I've been in the field for 25 years. I obviously don't write the report, but I've been working side by side with SLPs for a very, very long time. But the process can still be confusing for folks. In schools, for SLPs in particular, in schools, there's some barriers. Some SLPs have limited access to families, limited time, limited resources. And the process for some districts can be ambiguous in either whether or not you have support from administration to even go through insurance or just figuring out the whole funding process. Oftentimes you're left to your own devices to figure this out. No pun intended. And some districts, again, actually don't even allow SLPs to submit to medical insurance, so that can be a barrier. Some SLPs are not familiar with all the SGD funding options in Oregon, and there's many options. And then families are also not often aware of their options and even that there are AAC services. We do want to acknowledge up front there are a lot of inequities in this process of acquiring SGDs and just getting access to AAC in general. There's inequities all throughout education, but in particular when it comes to SGDs. It tends to be a niche. For folks and families that speak English as a second language, that presents its own barrier in trying to figure this out. There's huge inequities in students having access to private therapists. When they have access to private therapists, they're getting extra support, extra resources, and for many families, even accessing those services, they might not know how to do that or not have that ability. Some districts, as we mentioned, don't allow you to submit to insurance for SGDs. And then there's this whole question of when do we use developmental disability K plan funds? So there's confusion over what they cover, what school's supposed to cover, when do I go to insurance? And even if the family signed up. So a lot of times as a therapist, you might not even know if your family, you're working with a student who is signed up for developmental disability services. And then there are inequities in families' capacity to coordinate all this care between different providers. So we want to acknowledge those inequities up front. And if anyone has anything to share as we go along, raise your hand or unmute. So in general, there are 3 ways to go about funding a speech generating device. The first, and usually the gold standard, is going through medical insurance. And we're going to talk about why that's oftentimes the gold standard and a great place to start. So that can be going through private insurance, going through OHP Medicaid, or both if someone has secondary insurance. The second mechanism is going through state funding, and there's different options of state funding. So it could be through the district and school funds. It could be through developmental disabilities K plan, which is going through ODDS, the Office of Developmental Disability Services. It could be going through vocational rehab. We put a question mark next to OCB, Oregon Commission for the Blind, because we're not always sure when they might cover an SGD. I think it's been kind of rare that they might step in, but they are a resource for technology. And then TDAP, we'll share information about TDAP, which is the Telephone Device Access Program. It's also another funding resource within our state. And then funding of last resort, every time pretty much, is going to be charity. So those are your 3 pots. And if you'd like to learn more about these funding options or share with families or other folks, on our website, we have an AT funding page that kind of breaks down all these different areas. And we have a chart there as well with different charities. So, Noelle, if you want to take it away, we're going to start with insurance, the most exciting part, and where to start. So, Noelle, tell us, where do you start?
So we start with an evaluation or an assessment. You want to pick out the best device for the student that you're supporting. So you want to complete an eval and then have some type of documentation in that. And that can also go into the student's record and their IEP. So yeah, if you're a school-based SLP, as Carrie mentioned, does your district support SLP submitting to insurance? I was surprised to learn that some districts don't, and then maybe it's a little bit ambiguous. So just figuring out what is your process as a school-based therapist.
And Noelle, do you want to share what district you worked in and kind of what that perspective and experience you had was.
Yes, so I was an SLP in the Functional Living Skills Program for Multnomah Education Service District. And yeah, our process, we were allowed to submit to insurance, and we did have an AT-AAC specialist. Okay, so if we're talking a lot about school-based settings because of the group here, but just it's good to know as a private practice, private-based SLP, AAC, the eval write-up, all that time it takes, we know that's like no time at all, right? It takes a long time, and that time is not billable. So just making sure that your admin is aware of that. Another interesting situation that comes up when you're a school-based SLP is your student receiving private speech therapy? I was surprised to find out sometimes, not even until like an IEP meeting, that, oh yes, that indeed the student was seeing a private SLP. So if they are, do you have contact with them? Sometimes you can try, and then you get lucky, and then you can talk to them and find out, then you can align goals and collaborate together. But outside and private SLPs are a great resource to do that AAC eval. They typically have more time to do so, and they might even be an AAC specialist themselves. Another great place to start is just getting, if you can, obviously we get it from the parent, copies, or at least just general information about what the student's insurance is. Are they dually covered? Do they have both Medicaid and private insurance? That is the case sometimes. So just getting that information is going to help narrow down the process to let you know like what's your next steps might be. And as Carrie mentioned, is the family signed up for DD services? We've been so surprised to learn that many families don't say, do you have DD? And they don't know what you're talking about. And this is pervasive in hospital clinics even. So it's always just a good conversation to have, because in addition to funding SGDs, DD just opens the door for a lot more support for the family and the student, just until they're for their whole life. And getting them signed up earlier rather than later just benefits everybody. So yeah, just to summarize what Carrie said earlier, the benefits of going through insurance, we are recognizing that as the gold standard when that's possible. So if you get it through your insurance, that is going into the student's medical record as a support that they need for communication. And that just makes things easier down the road, especially if you're familiar, which we'll talk about in some future slides, that every 5 years within the insurance setting, durable medical equipment, which we'll get to, and SGD is considered durable medical equipment, can be replaced every 5 years. So it's just best to get it on record, and then it's harder, you can't really contest that if it's in writing, it's part of the record. And then the next benefit is that if it is in record, then if something happens to it, it gets damaged, something needs to be replaced. Again, it's on file with the student, and that is an easier process to go through. I'm not saying it's easy, but you have that documentation, it's not going anywhere. And lastly, like when I worked in the school setting and I wrote IEP goals, you always think, unexpectedly families can move. So getting it in someone's records can document that, and then it can go with them as they move. So just always thinking about, how am I setting the student up for success long-term, and with documentation that's going to make whoever that for future therapist also their life easier as well.
And real quick, Noelle, Chandra, if that was you that somebody shared in the chat going back to DD services, there is a lot of misinformation in our state, possibly other states, about getting DD services, because families think, oh, we have an IEP, we're getting school services, why would we need DD services? Well, in DD, you have an ISP, which is an individual support plan that provides supports in the community. and doctors are not aware of those benefits. So I don't know, Chandra, if you want to share, or whoever's comment that was, that a doctor actually frowned upon the idea. So
That was me. Yeah. So my daughter is on the spectrum, and I mean, we've just dealt with it since she was, a baby. And I did talk to the doctor when she was maybe 11 or 12 about it, because I was just kind of looking towards the future, because one day she's going to be an adult and she's not going to be allowed to be on my insurance unless we've gone through this process before she's a certain age, right? And he was just like, are you sure that's what you want to do? And I was like, well, I mean, I guess maybe I'm not sure. I don't know. So now I'm finding myself having to deal with that process now, and she's 24.
and
So
this is very typical. So I'm glad you shared that. There's a lot of confusion around why do you need both services, and even for pediatricians that they might think it's not a good idea and there's negative reasons, but it's only extra support. And like you said, starting early in that process, and it's community supports, in-home supports is very different than educational supports. So thanks for sharing.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really good, well, it's not a good story, but it's important to know about the misinformation all across the board. I had not similar, but I had a family, and this may come up. It's like that's why I might ask, how are they covered? I had a family that didn't want to sign up for DD because they're undocumented and they were afraid to sign up. So there's a lot of, like when Carrie had shared about the inequities, there's so many different situations. So it's just good to be aware of what's out there. Okie doke. So you want to write an AAC evaluation. Here are some great templates. These slides are available for y'all. These are live links. There's even a template from ASHA. It's great I've just been working with some SLPs at a local school district, and how the heck do you write an AAC report that isn't going to take you 10 years and is going to have the information that you want? So these are some great resources on evaluation templates. Okay, so let's get started with keep talking about medical insurance. How do you fund an SGD through medical insurance? What do they cover? What do they not cover? So they usually cover it when it's medically necessary. And then that is when I mentioned DME, durable medical equipment, that's in the insurance world, that's how they recognize speech generating devices. An SGD needs to be coded with a HCPCS code. It needs to start with these digits here, and Carrie can jump in if I'm missing something. She worked in the private insurance world. So that whole end side is a little bit still foreign to me. So with medical insurance, like I mentioned, it typically follows the 5-year rule. You cannot get a device replacement until 5 years unless there's a change in function. So let's say somebody used eye gaze or to access their device, and then maybe their eye gaze, they had a change in function. Maybe they had some type of incident and they can no longer use eye gaze. So you could justify getting a device before the 5 years in that case, if there's a change in function that they need a different access method or something like that. Considering the 5-year rule, you need to be careful about the things that you ask insurance to pay for. So, for example, you would typically not want to get like a step-by-step communicator device or like a GoTalk 9 or something funded through insurance, because it doesn't matter what the thing is. If you ask for a device and it's coded as DME, as a speech generating device, even if it's a step-by-step, the insurance is going to look at it as, we bought you your DME and you can't get a new one until for 5 years. So that's kind of an extreme case. We just want to put that information out there, especially for those of us in the school setting who are not as familiar with how insurance works. And as we mentioned, please jump on if you have any questions or comments. iPads are covered by insurance when they're coded as durable medical equipment. And there are a lot of the AAC vendors have iPads that are coded or have packaging and different things as DME. And then some vendors that also sell them are like AbleNet and Forbes AAC. Those are just examples, but a lot of the big vendors have iPad-based SGDs that are coded as such.
And I'm just going to pause for a sec. I did want to point out that Blair did share that through Toby Dynavox, they have a funding coach program. And as I mentioned at the beginning, funding has gotten easier. It's still not super fun, but 20 years ago, we didn't have as much funding support from our vendors as we do now. So the systems are more streamlined. You can fill out for a lot of them forms online, and there is support from the vendors. So please reach out to your vendors, particularly if this is your first device. They are more than happy to help. And same with the AT lab. Like I said, we're there waiting for your phone call. We'd love to talk about this stuff. Noelle loves to talk about it. So we are more than happy to help. And then Deb from Columbia Regional did mention that, as y'all might know, if you're going to get any mounting equipment for your SGD, so wheelchair mounting equipment, key guards, any accessories, please get them when you're ordering your SGD. Don't wait later. And then work with the physical therapist or the OT to figure out what the mounting should look like, work together and get it up front. If you wait later, it's super not fun. You can still do it, but it's not as fun.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for mentioning that.
Yes. And then also back to the HCPC codes. If people want to type in the chat, I am curious as school therapist, are you all familiar with those, what they are? Have you ever heard of these E25 codes before? Your accessories are also going to each have a code. You can get the step-by-step that has its own code. So all these devices have a HCPC code, but is this new to most folks? And if anyone wants to unmute and share, I'm just curious, in the school world, do folks know about these medical codes and how they kind of work? So Chelsea said she's not heard of these codes, and that's totally typical for most school therapists. So it's just good to kind of know about the codes. You don't have to memorize the codes, you can look them up. Most of them start with E25, and there's going to be like for your mid-tech tools, they're going to have a little bit different code than a high-tech tool. The length of message, there's certain features they're just going to assign it a different code, but you don't need to know the code. Your vendor's going to know the code. But just good to know about it. And it's just like wheelchairs. Wheelchairs have their own codes as well. So every piece of medical equipment has a HCPC code, and it's been approved by CMS. Julie said, I've worked with Dynavox sometimes, and they provide the codes. So yeah, you don't need to know the code, but it's good just to be aware of them and what they are.
What is CMS?
Say it again.
What is CMS?
Yes, good question. So the Centers for Medical, what is it? Services. It's the federal government. And so the feds are who approves the codes. So that's where it comes from. So great question.
Okay, so going back to SGD iPads or iPad-based speech generating device, we're going to talk about the features and benefits of an iPad-based device, a dedicated device, and so on. The benefit of these is that they can load most AAC apps. There are a couple of apps that are, correct me if I'm wrong, but there are some apps, I think like Proloquo, you cannot get from an AC vendor. That is like the big three, So just keeping this in mind. Again, an iPad is, I say this all the time, an iPad was not made to be a communication device. So there are some benefits and some not great things about iPads as communication device. So you just need to think about what the needs of your student are and then go from there. Sometimes the case that an iPad-based communication device, the case or the hardware may not work for everyone. So again, like Carrie said, work with your OT to figure out what is going to work.
Oh, no, you mentioned the big three. What's the big three?
Excuse me, my voice is a little froggy. I'm getting over being sick. Toby Dynavox, who's here, PRC, Saltillo, and Smartbox. Those are the big three. When I say big three, thank you. I need to qualify that.
And so the big three have been around for quite a long time and they sell dedicated devices. So up here, what we have are not considered the big three. This is like, AAC jargon. So AbleNet and Forbes are the ones that sell the iPad-based devices. So it gets confusing because they're all coded as SGDs, but these iPad-based devices are literally just iPads and then they put a case on them. You don't get as much support typically from Forbes and AbleNet as you would from the big three. But there's pros and cons in going either way. No right or wrong, but just kind of know there's the big three that have the dedicated big devices, meaning more robust, sometimes more support. Um, AbleNet can be sometimes quick and easy to go through, but you might not get as much support. We haven't worked with Forbes as much, but just be aware of these different companies. And again, give us a call. We're happy to talk about them. And then we have a Chandra put a link in the chat for more information on HCPC codes. Super exciting reading. And then she's also giving a plug saying the big three have the best reps in Oregon, which I would agree with.
And again, give us a call if you're confused or you want some of the reps information for the big three. I didn't mean to start calling it that, but
That's our new term.
That's great. I love it.
Oh my goodness. Okie doke. So as I mentioned earlier, the big three, here they are. They have their own well, I mentioned that they do have iPad-based communication devices that are SGDs. They also have dedicated devices. You probably heard this term before. It is not an iPad. It is a device that was created to be a communication device, a speech generating device. Here are some of the examples. And so they have their proprietary software. A lot of these three vendors can also have Saltillo, yes. Since PRC acquired Saltillo, they can have non-PRC or non-Unity based language systems. But you can discuss this more if you call us or if you want to talk to one of the reps from these guys. So this kind of breaks down what is the difference between an SGD iPad and a dedicated SGD. Again, as we mentioned, if you get a dedicated SGD or a device from one of the big three, you're going to have vendor support with programming, updates, repairs, and believe me, that comes in extremely handy because when an SGD was thrown across the room or I don't want to say dunked in a pool, but anything, lots of things happen out there in the real world. Dedicated devices are going to be generally more durable because as I mentioned, an iPad is an iPad. It was not meant to be a dedicated device. So there's benefits to that. And then there's detriments. There's things that are not so great about that. Depending on what type of device you get, the cost and the co-insurance is going to differ depending on, that's why I mentioned in the beginning, find out what kind of insurance you have. That's going to narrow down how you're going to pursue a device. The selection of software and apps, again, depending on what app or what software you want to use, language software, that's going to guide your decision. And some are not going to be available on some certain dedicated devices. Alternative access is a really big consideration. How is your student going to use the device? And some vendors have more options or different options depending on how, whether your student is a direct selector, they just select with their finger, they use eye gaze, they use switch scanning. That's just, again, a consideration. Another huge consideration that comes up a lot is the ability to unlock the SGD. So when an item is coded for insurance as DME, the reason an iPad is able to become a dedicated device is because it's locked and it's only for communication. It's only for using the app that you've chosen for your student. However, though, a really good argument can be made that a user needs full access to that device. They need to get on the internet. They need to use, they need to be able to join doctor's appointments via video chat. They need to be able to get on social media. There's arguments for all of that. So is the SGD that you are pursuing, is there an ability for it to be unlocked for the student, for the person to use it as more than just SGD? And we know now you can't make the argument anymore that you just need it to have speech output. You need more than that.
And I'll give a plug for alternative access. In general, if your student is going to be using, as Noelle mentioned, eye gaze or switch scanning, it is nice to have support from the vendor and go with a dedicated device in general. And the settings are often a little more robust, particularly if you have a switch scanner. So I don't know if you have anything else, Noelle, to add about alternative access and how to make that decision for iPad-based versus dedicated.
No, I totally agree with that. You're going to have more options with dedicated devices. And typically, you're going to have more options, as Deb Lesher mentioned, for mounting wheelchair parts. Like it can get very complicated. So there's a lot to consider, just knowing what it is and it is hard to narrow down. But, with a lot of these things, you just need to consider everything up front. Okay, so as I mentioned, you need to know which insurance your student has. And if your student has Kaiser, then that is going to narrow down your options quite considerably. So we're going to try and make a very complicated system a little bit more clear. Kaiser, they like what they like, and they have only contracted with PRC Saltillo and Tobii Dynavox. Those are the two vendors that you can get your devices more easily funded. They will not purchase iPads, but they will pay for the gift card or the communication app for an iPad. So that is one caveat. As we mentioned again, if you know you want a dedicated device through one of the big three vendors, talk to your rep first. Do yourself a favor, especially. I mean, you should do that no matter what, but definitely talk to them if you're going to go through Kaiser. Why do we know so much about the Kaiser situation in Oregon? And that's because of the wonderful Emily Anderson, who is the AAC SLP at Kaiser. She provided a detailed guide. And when I say detailed, I'm not kidding, of how to submit for an SGD through Kaiser if your student has Kaiser. I can email that to you. Our email is down here, the atlab@cvision.org. That goes to me. It doesn't go to a mystery person. And then again, I'm happy to chat on the phone about that because it's extremely confusing. And also just knowing if your student has Kaiser, you're going to hear us talk about this again. It's really good to get them connected, at least somehow through, if they're not already seeing Emily or an SLP at Kaiser, I would highly recommend trying to get on her caseload if your student uses AAC.
So Noelle, Michael was asking, and this is a great question, are we talking about just regular private Kaiser, straight up Kaiser, or are we talking also about Kaiser Medicaid?
Great question. We're talking about all of the above. Unfortunately, even though somebody gets Kaiser through Medicaid, you might think, as many people have, including us, that your life is going to be a lot easier because you can now use Medicaid funds in addition or instead of Kaiser, and that is not the case. Kaiser is Kaiser is Kaiser. So great question.
Yep. And Michael said, ugh.
Yes, indeed. Yes, I'm so sorry. Okay, so another funding source is DD or the K plan waiver, which Carrie mentioned earlier. This is another, look, we're talking about this because it's complicated and confusing, right? So everything's going to have nuances and caveats, and there's always the answer. It's like, yes, but unfortunately. But hey, that's why we're here as a resource. So if your family has DD, just some things to know that it requires a denial from insurance. There's as we mentioned earlier, a lot of misinformation out there. This can even occur with DD case managers just because they have so much to cover, and it's really hard. I know it's like everything to us, but it's only one tiny thing for them. So we have to sometimes provide education. So there's some misinformation out there that you used to need 3 denials from different either charity, insurance, other funding sources. That is not the case. You need a denial from insurance. That's it. And you also need to explain because there is some language, or there was language in the AT worker guide, which there is an update. I'll get to that in a minute. Um, but there was some language in there that said literally, we do not buy iPads. That is true and also not true. Um, just to make it even more confusing, but they will buy an iPad as a communication device if you can justify why, um, like the big 3 speech generating devices will not work for your student, and there are reasons for that. Maybe the case doesn't work, the access method, whatever it is, you just need to put that in your letter to the case manager. Just some more, just other things to know about DD funding is that there's a $1,200 yearly cap. If you go over that amount, you have to apply for an exception, which is doable, but again, not a fun process. And then we have the question about subscriptions, like because some apps are moving to subscription-based service. And we put a question mark there because we are pretty sure from our understanding and reading the AT worker guide that they will buy subscriptions. Just have a conversation with your case manager or with the students' parents or whoever's spearheading, working with DD about what you need.
And real quick, I'll share that as Noelle mentioned, getting a denial from insurance or an explanation of why a big dedicated device isn't going to work or an AbleNet device isn't going to work. It's super rare. I had one child who really just needed a thin iPad with no case because he needed like a cloth case on it that was like sewn and like super soft, and it had to do with like his access and mobility and transporting it and sensory issues. So it's pretty rare. But that was an instance, and we had to explain to Dee Dee why we just wanted a regular old iPad. And then also, you can get a step-by-step from Dee Dee, from K Plan, but you need to explain to them why you're not going through insurance. Because if you did go through insurance, as we mentioned before, then you're never going to get an SGD. You're not going to get a dedicated device, So for a few $100 step by step, insurance will pay for it, but then you can't use insurance for 5 years to get your big device. So we have written letters saying we need a step by step. Here's why we can't go through insurance. It'll, block their ability to get a more complex system when they're ready. The step by step will get them on that path. So you can write an explanation.
Thank you. For your reading pleasure and watching pleasure, we have 2 links on this page that are quite handy. The first is the ODDS Updated Assistive Technology Worker Guide. This is the guide that ODDS put out for their employees to explain their policies and procedures around purchasing assistive technology and a bunch of other stuff too. There's about, I don't know, 10 pages in there that are pertinent to us probably. They cover everything because DD is very comprehensive. So they just made a big update in January, is that right? To their worker guide. Very exciting reading. So check that out because there's a link here to the updated guide. Also call us if you need help navigating, finding the sections that pertain to speech generating devices. And then our second link here, the AT Worker Guide video, is a video. ODDS paid us to make a video to help explain how their services work when it comes to funding different things. And the video is really helpful. We think so. And you probably would find it so as well. So that link is here on the slide.
And so we have a couple great questions. So Elsa has a wonderful question. Does Kaiser often fund devices from a school-based SLP eval, or do they need to go through Emily at Kaiser?
Excellent question. You do not need to go through Emily at Kaiser. And that is the document I referred to earlier. She explains the process for school-based or even just I don't know, can't think of, I guess it wouldn't be a private SLP if it wasn't Emily. But no, your report as a school-based SLP is totally valid. There might be a reason why you want to go through Emily, and I can email you that the guide that she wrote of how she knows how to get through the system at Kaiser, and it's really hard for her. She cannot even get a hold of their funding department. So when I say you need to follow these instructions, I cannot overstate that.
Okay, and then we have a second question, another wonderful question from Michael about will insurance and or Medicaid, OHP pay for subscriptions?
I'm going to say it depends. Our understanding of reading the guide is that they will. You just, again, like anything you ask for DD that's a little bit not on their radar, you just need to explain why. And I would definitely get that documented because then it can, they need to be renewed. So I think making a big effort in educating the case manager and the family how to document this is going to make your life easier going forward.
And the insurance, that was for subscription. That question was about insurance, not case managers, not DD. We're talking about OHP and insurance because I actually don't know the answer to that question.
I don't know the answer either. I'm so sorry.
It's new.
It's a good question. Yeah, I don't know how we're going to navigate this new.
Yeah, does Blair, I don't know, does anyone else know? That's the hot question right now because they're moving to subscription. So Blair said her experience is they will not. Yeah, I think that's the big question right now. Thank you for bringing that up.
Whoops. Okay, another potential funding source is vocational rehab. It depends when you're in a school setting, whether you're super familiar with VR, vocational rehab or not. Typically, I recently learned that it can start as early as age 14. So we typically think about VR with transition age students, but it can also begin with pre-employment, and that is ages 14 to 21. And then that can also apply to employment planning, job development. It's a really great resource. Again, another funding option. And you might be asking yourself, well, when would I use VR? We tried to come up with kind of a unique example. I have one that I experienced as well when I was working in schools. So let's say you get a 21-year-old on transferred to your caseload. They're about to age out of the system. They don't have an SGD for whatever reason. Maybe it's just, there's lots of reasons why. But they are in VR, and then they might benefit from using an SGD for vocational tasks, especially really specific phrases and things that you would need on the job. VR can be a funding source for that SGD. So just being aware that VR is out there, it can start as early as age 14. So just talking with your team, with the family. Sometimes VR is involved early, just maybe like the classroom teacher is really aware and plugged into VR and the VR counselor. So just putting that out there.
And I'll still point out that there's still great benefits for this particular student to go through insurance and so they can have the device with them the rest of their lives, all the reasons we mentioned, repair, replace, but you might be short on time, they're aging out. And it's also the question of, is this more medically necessary? Do they need it to communicate throughout the day? Or does this tend to be a little bit more vocational focused, like Noelle said, like a lot of phrases at work? So the main question is think about where they're going to be using this device primarily. And that can kind of help you weigh the options of which way to go. Are they mostly using it in the home? Then that might be more DD funds. Do they primarily use it at school? Then the school should purchase it. Are they going to really be using it a lot on the job? Then think about VR. So it's a lot of times just thinking about where that device is going to be used. The other plug for using VR funding, I'm going to go back to my best friend, the Step by Step. I love him. That'd be a great purchase through VR, a Step by Step, or an iPad that maybe has like a planning app and other apps that might be used on the job. So just throwing that out there.
Okay, so we'll talk about our last funding source, charity. We have a list of a lot of the local charities or charities in Oregon. And again, there's a chart with these explaining the criteria on our website. There's a link there. Maybe Carrie can throw it into the chat. We do think of charity as a funding of last resort. And there's lots of situations that can lead you to that. We are one of the dispersers of the ZTOSH fund through Oregon Community Foundation. And so you might have heard that, like, through the ZTOSH fund, that it's through OHSU, and that is accurate, but they only have a window open in the month of November, I think, or October. I think it's November. There's UCP, United Cerebral Palsy. They disperse the funds, and we do as well. So if you submit an application to the ZTOSH fund for educational equipment, you will probably get a call or an email from me asking for more clarification. And there is, on the page here, is our application for the ZTOSH fund. And again, a lot of other charities in Oregon that are listed on this page and also on our website.
So does anyone have a question about ZTOSH funds while we're here? We're your Community Vision ZTOSH people, because we do get a lot of questions about the fund and the application process, what you'll cover. Okay.
Okie doke. Okie dokes. So other AT resources in the state. Every state has a Technology Act Center. Ours is in Salem, and it's Access Technologies, Inc. Brian is here from ATI. Thank you. Woohoo. Awesome. There is OTAP, as we're all very hopefully familiar with if you're here. Yeah, funded by the Department of Education. And then lastly, as Carrie mentioned in the beginning, the Telecommunication Devices Access Program, also known as TDAP. It's an amazing resource we have in Oregon for funding devices to use the telephone, or telecommunications, I guess, has expanded. It's not just the telephone, even though it is the Public Utility Commission. Does anyone have any questions about any of those?
Noelle, tell us more about TDAP. When would you go to TDAP for an SGD?
So well, you would use TDAP when you need to use the phone, and that can be a little bit of a broad area. If you want to talk to grandma on FaceTime, that counts as telecommunication. So if you're confused about that, you can contact TDAP, or you can call us to have a chat about it. I found the folks at TDAP are super awesome. They also, if you need a mount for that, that includes a rolling floor mount, which I have gotten for a client from TDAP, and devices. So they have a list of the items that they have in inventory, and they're a great resource.
And did they buy you the device? Do you own it
You do
yourself?
not own it. It is the property of the Public Utility Commission, but it is a long-term loan. And as I understand it, that is as long as you need the device.
In Oregon. And if you move, you got to give it back.
I would just like to add that Brian with Access Technologies will also be at AT Ties. He's going to do a session for us, I think, on Tuesday. Don't quote me on that. And then our website, if you guys go to our website, we just launched a brand new site. The entire ESD site is new to keep up with the accessibility requirements that are coming sooner than it's going to be crazy, right? And so there's some bugs in there. So if you have questions about our site, reach out to me. And ironically, my contact information is not on there yet, I don't think.
So Chandra, we have the old site up here, right? Is this I think that's the old link. I don't think I fixed it.
I'm not sure, but I'll put our new link in the chat.
Okay.
Okay, so this is how you contact the AT Lab. Again, like if you email that sort of general AT-Lab at CVision email, that goes to me. Every Thursday, we're open to the public. You can stop on in from 12 to 5. We have open hours. You can call or email us anytime. We have a lot of information and we would love to share it and we'd love to try to answer your questions. We can't promise you that we'll have an answer. But if we can't find the answer, then we'll get back to you and we're going to research it and try and find out um, how we can help. And yeah, you can scan the QR code. Here's all of our ways to get a hold of us. So let's open it up to more questions if anyone has them. I'm going to stop sharing here so we can chat.
So yeah, questions, thoughts, complaints.
I would really love to hear from you guys what your struggles and successes with this sort of thing has been. And I think that would be really helpful to people. Like, what are there other resources that you guys know about? How do you guys function in your districts?
Yes, share the struggles. Let's hear them.
I'll call on someone, I swear.
Maybe everyone's got it down. It's super easy. You got to figure it out.
I was wondering, I fund devices all the time through insurance. I work with our site-based programs and Grants Pass. And I hear from other districts that they're not doing that or they're hesitant to do that. So I was wondering why we wouldn't want our students to own their devices and why districts would be hesitant to fund through insurance. If anybody out there has a district who doesn't want you to be doing that.
Interesting question.
So Deb said it is, Deb Lesher, sorry, said she's from Columbia Regional. I'll just say time is a struggle. People worry about how long it takes for SUDs and will try for an iPad when it might be not appropriate. It's a lot of time, but Noelle, I know you've heard stories and talked to SLPs where their district flat out says you're not allowed to. So why do they say that?
You notice I was trying not to say anything, which is really hard for me. I have an opinion on everything. So, as I understand it, I've never been a school administrator, but as I understand it, it can come down to liability and it comes down to money at the end of the day. It's very expensive. And administrators are not, again, like when I was describing, this is our whole world, but to other folks, there's more to life than AAC. I know it's very shocking, but they don't really either understand FAPE or assistive technology in the IEP or the law. And they don't understand how this is related to education. Don't get me started, but it comes down to money in my understanding. And, districts are scared. They see a $15,000 device and they're like, we're not buying that. And, things get broken. There's more to it than that. I'm saying there are a lot of nuances. I'm just speaking like generally what I've understood about it.
And Noelle, when you say it comes down to money, why won't they let them submit to insurance? Is it because they know that it's going to take the SLP a ton of time and they have to pay for their time?
I wish that was the case. I think some administrators know that, and that certainly is a consideration. But I think, it gets sticky when it's like FAPE. And if a school employee is recommending a device, you could also potentially say, well, then the school should provide that device. They needed to access their education. So it's a little bit of a slippery, some administrators, I imagine, feel it's a slippery slope. And
I think it's education. I think that the administrators, like you said, they think it's going to open a door to liability and now they have to buy it. So I think it's educating administrators, which is hard. We do have, Julie said, my district allows me to work with whichever SGD company I prefer. I have had success every time I worked with the Tobii Dynavox without cost to the school district or to the parents. The funding crew has been so helpful and supportive from how to write the report, reviewing, submitting to the doctor. It's a it's it's a wait going through the process, but I like how durable the devices are and the support. She's like, no, I don't work from Tobii Dynavox. She's just had such great experiences. So thank you for sharing, Julie. And so that's great. Like your administration, again, I think it goes back to misinformation. Like they just get scared when they hear about big fancy things. And then Noelle, I also didn't know if they understand the nuances and think like, oh, well, insurance is medically necessary. We're not medical. Like, do you think that also plays into it? They're like, we're education. Why would we submit to medical?
Yeah, I think that also occurs to them. It's confusing. Like, we'll just be honest. Like, it's confusing, but an important thing. And then Francisco made a great comment. I don't know if our district allows us to go through insurance, but we can't touch personal devices. I'm guessing for liability reasons, and I think so too. And I was just going to say, I was thinking that. What happens if let's say it's an insurance funded personally owned device, you bring it to school, it gets broken at school. Who's on the hook to replace it? Again, we're talking about misinformation because as we mentioned earlier, if insurance bought the device, they need to replace it. So this just begs the question that it's like, what is the process in your school? And what are all the potentials? Like, what happens if it gets broken at school? What happens if it gets lost on the bus? So just having those conversations up front, they're uncomfortable and they take a long time, but it's just good to know where do you stand? What is the situation? And even finding that out from your school admin can be a challenge. Great conversation.
Know that I've heard rumblings from my ESD that we're going to be starting to bill insurance. So do you guys lean on your ESDs for that service at all? Or does your ESD not provide that service for you guys' districts? Maybe we don't know that.
That's a thing. There's talk.
Deb shared a really excellent resource that was published last year by the Department of Education. And they lay out very clearly in plain language what is and what is not required of school districts regarding AT. It's called Myths and Facts Surrounding Assistive Technology Devices. And it's pretty short considering it's from the federal government. It's a nice little, I don't know, booklet. It'd be a great tool that I would have used back in my school days to talk to admin about assistive technology. Again, like Carrie mentioned, it's just we think it's a lot of misinformation or just misunderstanding of what the laws are, what they need to pay for. And we all know that schools in Oregon, public schools, money is not hanging from trees. So it is, we have to consider all the variables, and then that's why we want to talk about different funding options. Elsa said, I don't have that service from our ESD. Individual SLPs in our district need to initiate insurance funding. There is a little time built in my FTE to help other SLPs with this, but most of our other SLPs are intimidated by the process. 1,000% yes. Again, how do you even do it? And it takes forever. That's great that they have you as a resource. We can also help you with that. I shared some of those evaluation templates. Thanks for sharing.